Welcome to Beyond the Game. This is not the video I want to make. No one ever wants to make these kind of videos, but this is going to be a goodbye for now for Beyond the Game. We're sort of taking a break here, and I'll explain the reasons why, the idea of the project, what we've learned and developed throughout the whole project, and sort of give you a bit more insight into what happened with Beyond the Game. But ultimately, January 2021, I think it was, I started thinking I really want to do a podcast, but I don't want to just do a podcast where I talk about Rocket League because that was what I was talking about primarily all the time as a commentator. But I wanted to talk about people's health, their mental health, the challenges of being in the industry, all the kinds of things that people couldn't really speak about publicly because it would damage their brand. It would make them look like they were moaning or whatever it was. And so I wanted to create a safe place where they could talk about it. And I felt like that wasn't really possible online. So I tried to come up with the idea of how we could build a set, do it in person. And all of this was far too big a project to be done by someone who was in my position. I wasn't earning stable money. I was very much a freelance contractor. But then towards the end of that season of Rocket League, I started to get informed I was going to be part of the next season where I'd have this amazing contract, and I was recognizing I'd have a lot of excess money and I'd have the ability to fund the project myself. So I worked with my friend Harry, who's behind the camera right now, and we came up with the plan for Beyond the Game, and we decided to move into this flat here where we would work together to make the whole project, using this living room here as the set. As you can see, the set is incredible. We went for the highest quality tech we could. We got really nice cameras. We wanted to try and make it the gold standard of podcast quality, and I think we hit that. I think that's something that we definitely nailed. It took a bit of time, but 40 episodes in, I think one of the things we can safely say that we got to was the highest quality of podcast audio and visual that you could get without going into a purpose-built studio. So many people came to my flat to record the podcast and couldn't believe that this was just in my living room, right? When they watched it online, they just assumed it was a studio. But we tried to create that high quality tech, and even off the back of that, a popular UK podcast, Happy Hour, contacted us and asked us for our advice on how to make their podcast higher quality, and we went and helped them out a bit with that, and still helping them where they need it, because a lot of what takes to make a podcast high quality takes a lot of practice, and we managed to get that through this podcast. So 40 episodes we did, most of them in person, and I think some of the conversations we had were honestly eye-opening for me as much as people who listen to them, hopefully. Off the back of them, things happened, like opportunities off the back of them where we connected and created things. A lot of people got a chance to talk about stuff they never would have been able to talk about elsewhere. So I was very proud of those kinds of things that happened off the back of it. But the challenge with it was we had such a diverse group of guests that it didn't necessarily resonate with everyone. And that's one of the challenges you see with guest-based podcasts. If the host himself hasn't built up a hardcore fan base, then it's very difficult to get that recurring audience who come back and trust you with every single guest you have. And I think I was inspired by a lot of interview-style podcasts and TV shows, but it's really hard to do that from the ground up, especially in the gaming space where realistically, we're separated more than you realize by the games that we reside in and the esports we reside in. So towards the end, we start to focus more on Rocket League people, and it definitely had its ups, but the problem you've got with that is it had to be more online, because doing it in person with Rocket League guests would limit you to a handful of relevant people. And so we started to lean towards the online podcast, and it took away from the original goal of the podcast, which was to be a very open, heartfelt conversation talking about things that were otherwise quite tricky. And I think we nailed that with those that we had in person, but it started to lose that aspect as it went on. I think it's also fair to say that getting people in person to a podcast is harder than it looks. A lot of the top podcasts have a team of people who literally are there to try and get people to come to your podcast. They'll reach out to agents and managers and everything. We didn't have that. It was just me DMing people and asking them for favors. And I thank every single guest who did come along, because I know it took a few of them a really long time to get here. And obviously they're paying to travel here. I tried being as hospitable as possible for every single person who came along. But the time and the travel it took for all those people was very kind. And off the back of that, I felt incredibly guilty as I started to message more people. I started to message some of my friends who realistically shouldn't be coming on my podcast because there's no reason for them to. But some of them were kind enough to come on, and others were, admittedly busy and tried to be just honest about it. And I accept that that's just going to be the challenge with an in-person podcast, where online it's a little bit easier. So all of these challenges meant that it just became harder and harder to fit the original goal of the podcast. And it was really sad when I was really happy getting Kieran Carlin on towards the end. And it was one of the best podcasts we had, one of the funniest podcasts. My mum, who listens to every podcast, said it was one of her favorites. And I was really happy with it. But then because Kieran Carlin's audience didn't align with my audience, the algorithm didn't pick it up, and so on and so on, it just didn't get watched or listened by many people. And that was the kind of the sad truth of having a multi-guest podcast, as it becomes very reliant on, do the right people see it? Does it align with what people want out of that person? Is the algorithm going to pick it up? And we did get lucky with the algorithm on a few occasions. Early on, Freya and Scott's podcasts both got picked up, and the feedback with all of those was incredible. Everyone who watched them said they were amazing, and that was promising because it showed that if people were to find the podcast with their favorite content creator or esports person on, they would be entertained through it. But it was tricky to try and get the algorithm to work when you had so many different people to hit. So the podcast was flawed in that sense. But we also started working on our short content. And again, that went quite viral a few times. We had the most viral of our TikToks, which was John explaining his greatest ever gaming achievement. And it was amazing seeing all the comments from people saying how they also had a greatest gaming achievement that they wanted to share. And everyone was, I think it was the most positive and happy TikTok comment section I've ever seen, because everyone could resonate with sharing their greatest ever gaming achievement. And people were, comparing and saying how great each other's achievements were. And I think that was one of the most positive moments in the whole journey, is we created a very entertaining short form content. The algorithm picked it up and people engaged with it. And so there were some highlights in that sense. But I think the other side of it is, with a project like this, you got to look at what were the positives, even if it failed. And that was one of the initial saving graces of going into this project, is I knew once we kicked off, there was a chance that I wouldn't be able to fund it anymore with losing work in esports. But I knew that if I lost the money that it took to run the project, to buy all of this stuff, the equipment, to pay my editor and producer to do it all, that at least everyone who is involved would come out of it learning from it and having a year of experience. So the people who've worked on it, Joe and Harry in particular, every single week, they're now much more knowledgeable and experienced in the areas that this project has taught them. And off the back of that, we'll hopefully find more work in the future and be able to put this as a 1-year section on their CV. I think also the events that we went along to Insomnia and RLCS, and RLCS content went down very well. We produced some interview-based content, some socials content, and people love that. So to be able to do that also made me realize that broadcast journalism and event-based journalism was something that we could have done more of, but with the challenges of how many events there are, the costs of it, also the fact that across esports there's varied interest from different people. We knew the Rocket League content would go down well due to my link to Rocket League, but would that same effect have happened if we went to a League of Legends event or a CS event or a Valorant event? We'll never find out, I guess. But some amazing things we learned from it, and consequently, it was not a failure. It was a very positive experience, just one that unfortunately can no longer continue, as we're moving out of this flat in the next few weeks. And so consequently, there will be no set. If we wanted to carry it on, it would be online. But again, as mentioned before, that wouldn't really fit the whole idea of the podcast. And then lastly, the cost of this and the work that it takes to maintain is getting to a point where it's distracting the opportunity for all of us, in particular myself, from being able to go on and pursue actual careers that can make us money, rather than side projects like this was initially intended to be alongside my casting career that would be an investment instead. So we're going to pause it. Doesn't mean it's over forever, of course. There's amazing followers now. We've built up thousands of people across all the different platforms, short form, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc. And so there is a chance that we bring this back in the future. It will probably be different. Maybe we'll come back and just do online interviews because they are a lot easier to do. But for now, this is the end of Beyond the Game, and it has been a lot of fun doing it. I think the best thing now is anyone who's listened this far through this explanation would comment the moment you found it, maybe your favorite podcast, your favorite short, your favorite thing you learned from this, maybe. I'd just love to hear anything like that, because it's really easy to forget that when you're making content, you're doing it to entertain, inform, and improve people's lives. And I do believe what we did was able to do that, but you don't hear it. So as a sort of like final chance to say goodbye to the project, it would be good to see that. So I appreciate everyone who's been involved, and thank you for listening. And I guess you'll never get the episode where Gregan is interviewed by Ian Chambers, which was always planned to be episode 50. Maybe that could be something we do online in the future. But thank you very much, and I guess goodbye for now.